Today I want to talk about books, real books, books that are printed, books that have got all sorts of information in from the past, as well as books of today. And I want to reference books because we're moving in an age at the moment, are we not, of the digital age in which everything is going online, everything is being digitized, everything is being put into a format that is now editable and changeable respectively. And this is a worry to me because we have seen, have we not, how our history is being changed. I gather, and I don't know how true this is, that there are people employed to put in the sky in some of our old films and various other things, even in picture books, chemtrails, those chemical trails in the sky, as if to say, well, they've always been there. This is not an unusual thing. Well, if you have a hardback book or a paperback book that was printed prior to the digital age, and you can look at that and reference it and say, well, hold on a second, that's not true, is it? You can prove something. And as you can see, my house is fast becoming like a personal library. I have books on all sorts of different subjects, and I love books. People send me PDFs to read, they send me off to websites to read, and they very often offer books that they've written to read. And I have to decline if they're in a PDF or if they're not printed out. I haven't got a very good printer, and the ink is very expensive, and the time to print out somebody's PDF and then read it. But I would prefer to do that than look at screens. We are looking at screens far too much. We know that the color of the screen is not good for us. That sort of blue screen is not good for the eyes. And I spend enough time answering emails and editing and making videos where I'm in front of a screen. And I want to get away from the house and the EMFs and all of that by perhaps sitting in the garden, not that I've got much of a garden in my 2 up, 2 down Victorian house, or going to the park and taking with me a book that can sit in the bag that I can lose myself and read. But for me, the important message of this video is that we should all be collecting and preserving the printed matter. It is vital because as everything goes online, as everything is being digitized, I think even Google were digitizing books years ago, old books. So that's nice. But if somebody switches your access off to the internet, or let's say there is a massive, a colon injection from the sun, whatever it's called. I did do a video about it, but it's funny how the memory can quickly go. A mass colon ejection from the sun that wipes out, say, servers. Or let's say that the powers that be want to control all the access to the internet and digital information, or change it, manipulate it subtly without us knowing. I think that's obviously an infringement of our rights, and it gives control, like anything, to somebody else. If they hold the monopoly of everything because it's been digitized, we're seeing that with deeds of people's houses. They're saying, oh, you don't need to have the deeds anymore in physical form. You can have them online in electronic form. We only need the basic information. But isn't there something about having a deed on the vellum paper that it was originally produced, stamped by the borough or whomever, by the land registry, giving you that title? You've got something physical to hold up and say, there's the signature. Signatures are very important, autographs by men and women in the private, of course, but signatures from these corporations, from these governmental bodies, having that actual wet ink signature, which is why it's so important when a bailiff turns up, or a enforcement officer is trying to extract money from you, to have actually the magistrate's signature or the judge's signature on the court paper embossed, a proper genuine thing, than something on a phone or a laptop or a tablet, which could easily be manipulated in something like Photoshop, and you can't tell whether it's real. The physical world is so important to preserve, like so many things, like the crafts that people used to have, you know, blacksmiths and thatchers, woodworkers, cobblers, these old skills that are being continually taken away from us because we've allowed that responsibility to go to these big corporations and mass industry. This is why I think books which contain vast amounts of knowledge, and of course old books may be wrong, they may have got some of the details wrong, and perhaps, you know, modern theories, modern experience, modern technology has perhaps proved some of the former theories wrong, but at least you can read those former theories, you can see where they've gone wrong, and like in the paintings that may have been airbrushed with something in, you can see that it was a genuine thought at the time. And actually, maybe they're more right than we realize, especially when you think about some of these occulted technologies in the past, the sort of free energy that many people were working on, the various health remedies that many people were working on before Big Pharma came along and said, no, 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 that's all silly. Herbs and tinctures and natural remedies are just rubbish. You've got to go with our little white pill because we're scientists, we know, and therefore they've taken people's minds off what we used to do for, well, since we were around as men and women, finding natural remedies for natural problems. And so I think it's absolutely vital that we start to collect books. I'm reading a number of books at the same time, obviously not simultaneously, but I don't necessarily read one book and then get to the end, then read another. It depends what interests me. So I've recently purchased a book here from 1932, which is called The Pound Sterling, and it's the history of money up until the 1930s. I'm very curious to read from this perspective the history of money, of coinage in the Middle Ages, of how coins were put onto the gold standard, and how money was backed, and how rigorous it was so that it couldn't be counterfeited, that the currency was fair to all. And then, of course, we know what's happened to money, taken off the gold standard, and we have these promissory notes, which of course are only circulated and able to buy bits and pieces by the faith that they mean something, when of course they're just bits of paper. I promise to pay the sum on demand of what? No longer sterling silver that it once had. I shall probably make a video on that very soon. I'm also simultaneously reading, or, you know, not when I say simultaneously, I don't mean I'm reading like this, you know what I mean. I'm reading this remarkable book by Juliet Barker that came out a few years ago about England Arise, the People, the King and the Great Revolt of 1381. We can see riots going on at the moment and people are unhappy with things. The problem with the riots at the moment, it does seem that the governments and those that are trying to control us have carefully manipulated us with the mainstream media and indeed the alternative media, so that we seem to be arguing among ourselves. And yet we actually know who the troublemakers are, and these are the dark forces who are trying to pull the strings. And back in the day of the Great Revolt, or the Peasants' Revolt, as it was named in many history books, the people felt the pressures of the king and the nobles, the elite of the time, who were putting out the poll tax, and they decided they weren't happy with it. They knew who was responsible. They weren't arguing amongst themselves, although there were some personal vendettas carried out thanks to the cover of the Great Revolt, as people then this anger, this suppressed imposition from the government and the king, the nobles of the time, started to vent, and they would attack many of the people who were oppressing them. So, but generally they knew who was aggressive to them, their aggressors. We seem to have lost that sense of who it is that is aggressive because of manipulation. And that is, again, another reason why I think books are so vital, because you can see the clarity of thinking from those peasants, if you like, although they weren't actually peasants who did much of the revolting. It was very much the middle classes, because they could see clearly and they could talk. And it's amazing the speed of communication back in the 14th century that was going on. So that's another one. And of course, books like this I absolutely adore. The Farm and the Village by George Ewart Evans, which talks about the old days of farming. Now, I'm particularly interested in farming. I believe that we are being poisoned very much in our agriculture. We have gone down the route of big industry, of high tech, in order to produce what's ended up in supermarkets, what people think of as food, this nutrient-free, vitamin-deficient substances, which most people have forgotten what food is and mistake this stuff as something that is actually beneficial to us, when really all it's doing is giving us something to fill our bellies with, and then our gut is fighting to say, well, hold on a second, where's the nutrients? Where's the goodness in all of this? And keeping us in a low vibration because our bodies are unable to perform properly and more healthily. And of course, the cost of real food that is not produced in significant numbers has increased. And those people who do go to farm shops obviously are paying a little bit more for food that is the best it can be, despite what's being sprayed in the skies and landing on the land, and the water that is being not clean, and so on and so forth. But it is interesting to read, again, some of the old ways, the old techniques, and also the morals, the ethics, the communities of how each helped one another. Yes, they were arguments, and yes, there was all this, I'm better than you, and we're going to do this, and you haven't got that. But actually, when things came to it, the local people, Mrs. Jones wasn't very well. The community came out to help her. There was an etiquette. There was an ethos, there were morals, that even the poor could be looked after. They were able to go after the harvest, for example, and glean from a harvest of wheat or barley, which meant that after the corn had been taken by the farmer, the poor could go out and glean, pick up what had been left from the threshing, or the collection rather, and the harvesting, and they would manage to collect what was, salvage what was left. The farmers were not saying, no, you can't come on my land and get any of that. We're just going to let that go to seed. There was an understanding that everyone was part of the community, no matter what station in life they were at. And that's very important. These days, when you compare it to where we are today, such a different matter. And as I say, we are too busy arguing amongst ourselves and not really pinning or focusing our attention on those that really are to blame. I would urge people to go and support charity shops, old bookshops if they exist, even online, buying old books. A friend of mine was saying that they've been buying books on how to do things, things in the house, how to cook certain meals, because if they take away our internet and everything is online, and we're relying on an online presence all the time, we're being made more impotent because we're being dumbed down by what those that want to steer, like in 1984, how we think and influence us that way, rather than having the freedom to pick up a book, look at it and go and disagree completely and say, oh, well, that's so stupid, that's so long-winded, we could do this now and we could do that. Or discover things that have not been suggested or come onto the tip of their mind by some of these amazing things. So the importance of books is absolutely vital, and I urge people to return to the hardback, the paperback, the printed physical matter, and where possible, start your own libraries. I think for the future, this is vital.